we'll cut you off at 18. Thank you. We'll get started.
Can we start? Can we start? All right. Let's get this going. So, welcome back, everyone. We're going to have the first paper session, and this one is on negotiating intersections. And for our first presentation, we'll have the paper entitled Online Sexual Harassment Over Anonymous Social Media in Bangladesh. And we'll have Faika Farhat Nova presenting this paper. Please take it away.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Good morning, everyone. Welcome to my today's presentation, Online Sexual Harassment Over Anonymous Social Media in Bangladesh. This study is a joint collaboration between Marquette University and University of Toronto. My co-authors are Mohammad Rashiduzzaman Rifat, he is from University of Toronto. We have Protasha Shaha, she is from University of Dhaka. She helped us to collect data on the field. We have Saeed Ishtiaq Ahmed, who is from University of Toronto, and we have my supervisor, Dr. Shayan Guha from Marquette University. And finally, I'm Faika Farhat Nova, a second-year graduate student from Marquette University. This is an overview of the points that I'm going to discuss today. I'll provide a short introduction, related work, the findings from our study, a brief discussion, and design implications. Anonymous social media is a product of technology that allows its user to communicate with each other anonymously. It can be fully anonymous to semi-anonymous based on the types and varieties of the applications. Some example of the anonymous social media, in short ASMs, can be AskFM, Ikyak, Secret, Saraha, and so on. Although there exists mainstream online social media like Facebook or Twitter, some people often prefer to use ASMs for achieving protection against their socially disapproved behaviors, including online harassment, while some may seek it to share anything on the internet without the fear of social retaliation. Although previously ICTD and HSEC communities studied online harassment focusing on developing context, most studies on anonymity and anonymous social media situate itself around Western context, but not on low and middle income countries. So, to bridge that gap, in this particular study, we focused on Bangladesh, a developing country in Global South, where exists local practices of misogyny, patriarchy, and gender-based violence against women that often reform how people behave on social media. We investigate different harassment experiences that are triggered by different socio-cultural norms, users' expectations, and suspicion about harassers' identity while using anonymous social media in Bangladesh. We also investigate how these users respond to such harassment and continue to participate in those applications. In this section, I'm going to talk about some of the existing literature on anonymity and online harassment. According to Gary Meggs, anonymity broadly means the availability and unavailability of the person's physical existence. In computer-mediated communication, anonymity is often linked with less accountability, privacy, and more disinhibited behaviors like sexual harassment. It's been well reported that sexual harassment, violence, aggression, and cyberbullying are more common to people who are in disguise in these anonymous social medias. Previous studies also show that women usually are the primary victim of online harassment, but they often prefer to be passive, pretend not to notice, walk away rather than giving any response or reaction to the harassment. This preference of being passive is often shaped by the contextual traditions, sociocultural norms, and unwritten expectations from women. Some women seek social support to break the silence, but if such support is not available, they feel unsafe and vulnerable to go through the stressful experiences which holds them back from protesting. Harassment is often a way of exerting power. Several ICTD studies have reported how the practice around digital technology are heavily impacted by the strong patriarchal social culture and values and venomous misogynistic practices prevalent across the country. The cultural values and social practice in most communities of Bangladesh are discriminatory against women, and sexual violence against them is widely prevalent. The growth of technology has aided to that event by providing more convenient platforms to harass them. The existing studies on anonymous social media and associate harassment, mostly done on Western culture, have potentially provided information on the severity and consequences of using ASM platforms. And as researchers, we believe that it is important to study and understand such events in the context of developing country like Bangladesh as well, due to its growth in internet access and related existence of severe contextual harassment. So for our study, we followed a mixed method approach that includes an anonymous online survey and semi-structured interviews. The survey was distributed through the researchers' online social networks like Facebook or Twitter by making public posts. The survey was taken by 291 participants and was open for 2 weeks. The participants for the interviews were selected through snowball sampling, and total 27 participants volunteered for it. The interviews were about 30 minutes long in average. The interview questions mainly asked about the participants' motivations, targeted audience, positive and negative experiences, strategies, and overall feelings surrounding ASMs, which means anonymous social media, which helped us to get a deeper understanding on the pattern of using these applications in Bangladesh. Here is a demographic insights of our study. We almost had 50-50 male-female gender ratio for both study for both survey and interview. The age of the participants mostly was around 21 to 32 years range, and most of them were from Dhaka, which is the capital of Bangladesh. Also, a large number of participants in this study were students. In this section, we'll be talking about some of the findings that we observed through our study. And initially, we'll start looking into the survey data and findings. Around 50% of the participants primarily used Saraha, 40% used Ask.fm, and the rest used Ikiak, Secret, and other anonymous social medias. Although the applications are anonymous in nature, people in Bangladesh use different strategies to identify the sender. The strategies included language pattern, words or slangs, use of emoticons, tone of message, context, and content. Among 291 participants, 72 mentioned about receiving uncomfortable messages, whereas 104 specified those messages as harassment. Due to bad experiences like that, 12.18% of the participants mentioned about discontinuing their participation in these applications. In this section, I'm going to talk about the findings that we observed through our interviews. From the qualitative data that was collected through the semi-structured interviews, we basically observed 4 categories of harassing messages that the participants described to face through anonymous social media in Bangladesh. The first category is sexual propositions. Among the interviewees, 19 out of them mentioned about receiving posts that suggested sexual propositions. If you read this specific example, you will see the not so subtle sexual proposition that this interviewer received anonymously, which she further described as offensive and demeaning to her. This example portrays the notion of seeking sexual gratification in combination with power that demeans the receiver, as it was sent anonymously and the receiver is unable to do anything against it, even though she knows the sender, or in case she could guess the sender. 11 out of the total interviews talked about posts that included sexually objectifying contents sent through anonymous social media. We could further subcategorize it into 2 parts. 1, that praises women's body part. 2, that body shames them. If you read this example, you will observe specific words that actually represent the sexual objectification of women, like size, shape, juicy, etc. Although this example is taken from a male interviewee, almost all the male participants in our study shared at least one story about one of their female friends, acquaintances, or family members who received similar kind of messages through anonymous social media. This example portrays the notion of gender inequality and dehumanization of women through objectification that may be rooted into individuality that is largely shaped by the social values of Bangladeshi context. The third kind of harassing messages is romantic flirtation. Although it may not seem a form of harassment in different contextual backgrounds, rather considered as an unwanted or sometimes sweet embarrassment to many of us, it was termed as harassment to some of our participants in Bangladesh. This given example shows the romantic interest of the sender on the receiver, which was morally unethical and uncomfortable for her. The pattern of questions, although sent with a flirtation purpose, was to some extent harassing to our participant. The fourth category is dating inquiries. Those types of posts ask receivers regarding their personal dating information, like as you can see here, their sexual relationships with their significant other, their sexual preferences during dating, and so on. This post mostly contains sexual contents that query receivers' personal information that made our participants highly uncomfortable and harassed. Apart from categorizing different forms of harassment, our study also showed that although anonymous social medias are anonymous in nature, the perceived concept of people who use this application in Bangladesh is to try and identify the sender. As many of them get harassed through these platforms, the default suspicion goes directly towards someone they know. The suspicion is formed based on the shared patterns of the receiver's personal profile linked on this existing social network, the contents and the context of the received post. Finally, similar to our survey data, the interviewers also withdrew their participation in further using the technology due to the harassing experiences they faced through these applications. In this section, we will unpack a bit more to make sense of our findings on the phenomenon of online harassment that happens through anonymous social media. Our study addresses different forms of harassment that happens particularly through anonymous social media in Bangladesh. This categorization was not made based on the assumption of the researchers, but was defined by the perceptions of the victims themselves. This perception largely depends on the invisible socio-cultural norms and values of Bangladesh that elicit towards the definition of harassment. For example, public discussion on sex or any topic containing sexual contents that include sexuality and sexual health are considered taboo and frowned upon in this country. So while some messages may seem harmless or flirtation to others, may not seem such harmless to Bangladeshi people. Although in Bangladesh online harassment is widespread, even these anonymous social media offer an easier way to amplify it. As it provides one kind of unaccountability to some extent, it is possible and easier for them to exert power over women through anonymous social media due to its contextual norms and patriarchal practices against women. As our participants prefer to share their personal anonymous links mostly with the close circle of people, this preference often is shaped by the such sociocultural context of Bangladesh, whereas some communities are collectivist. This creates a hazy space between the receiver and sender, where the sender/harasser is mostly invisible yet known. Although a majority of women victims in our study share the experience of being silent against online harassment through anonymous social media, there are cases where women raise their voices on online platforms to protest. While this, after they protested, there are some cases where they were further victimized, which can be coined as secondary victimization that actually triggered them not to protest again in future. This kind of experiences actually led them to technology non-use and limited participation, which is very much important in ICTD context. So we have some design implication that we think are important to design anonymous social media. So some points are efficient classifiers that needed to classify and restrain foul posts to be sent, promote positivity among sender and receiver through persuasive interface, and manual restriction and reporting should be maintained strictly. We also think that improvement of ICT Act 2016 is crucial to address anonymous online harassment. Improvement of law and policies is important to understand and work against online harassment that happens through anonymous social media. Lastly, we want to acknowledge that these findings mostly represent the urban population of Bangladesh. In future, we intend to extend our study to more marginalized population like LGBTQ community to address their experience of online harassment in a developing context. This finding extend the current literature on online harassment, technology non-use, and most importantly, anonymity and anonymous social media in the context of low and middle income countries, where we observe the notable impact of context on the way people experience anonymous social medias. We believe this study can particularly benefit the ICTD community due to its wide emphasis on technology and harassment in a marginalized community. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any question.
Hello. Thank you, Faika. So we'll open the floor for questions.
So one quick question, perhaps it's, I think I see that you mentioned it in the end. Is this a case where, like an email, where we have filters which block certain type of obscene comments? We don't get email nowadays, which sell us various stuff. So is this a case where a pure technology, machine learning kind of solution to solve this problem? And is there anything further to talk about it other than that?
Yeah, we actually wanted to mention like that we need some kind of filtering in this kind of applications to block messages from unwanted people. But in most cases, anonymous social media that are currently in the market, they do not provide this kind of filtering. And there are some system online that, for example, Squadbox, which was developed by MIT, they have this system implemented currently in the market that actually involve human interference. For example, if somebody is sending you harassing email that doesn't go directly to you, it goes one of your friends or family or someone, they will audit the email, and then if they say it's fine, the email will be sent to you. So this is a human interference in the system. But the problem with this kind of system is that privacy. So there might be some emails, some contents in the emails that I don't want my family or friends to see. So this kind of human interference may create further problem for me. So that's why we're saying that we need a implemented classifier in the application which will automatically detect foul words or slangs and reject the post to be sent to the receiver.
Hello. I just wanted to ask, 50% of the participants, they were male. Do you have any statistics of how many of them were actually harassed online?
There were actually 13 male and 14 female in our study. And out of 13, actually 2 mentioned about receiving messages that those were uncomfortable for them, but not harassment. They didn't consider those harassment. But out of 13, 12 actually mentioned about a story about one of their female friends or acquaintances who actually went through the harassing experiences through anonymous social media. So we mainly focused on women who were the primary victim of this kind of online harassment.
How does the sender know that whether the recipient is male or female?
Yeah, that's what I actually mentioned. So the receiver used some strategies like language pattern, the way the message was sent. So sometimes people actually use some kind of slangs. So in personal life, they know this is the person who actually used this specific slang. So those kind of identifiers they actually use to guess the person, although there was no way to 100% to be sure who the person is. So that's why it's the problem with anonymous social media is that although you can identify or guess the sender, you cannot do anything about it if the person is not accepting that he's the harasser or she is the harasser.
Okay, so thank you so much. Please help me thank Faika for her wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. So our next paper is entitled The Unexpected Entry and Exodus of Women in Computing in HCI in India. This is part of the pre-published papers category that we had this year. And this paper has been previously presented at CHI 2018. And for the presentation here, we'll have DV Dakar from Google presenting.
It's okay, I have a stopwatch. Thanks. No, the other one. Here, that's fine. Huh? Hi everyone. Thanks a lot, David, for the introduction. I work in the education team at Google, and this work was done with my collaborators Nithya, who couldn't be here, who's from Google too. She's a researcher at Google, Purva, and Kentaro from University of Michigan, and Pratap, who's from the YouTube team at Google. This work has been presented at CHI before by Kentaro, so I'm assuming some of you might have seen it there and at UW where I presented it. But I'm still going to start. So gender in computing has been a topic of interest and in discussion with regards to a lot of the things that we've been seeing in the mass media, be it the revelation by Google about its inequality in hiring, or be it Uber's gender discrimination case. Gender is a topic that we've been hearing about a lot, and specifically we as the ICTD community are much more engaged with it because it affects us quite directly. There's been a lot of effort around it. But still the reality is yet to catch up with what the ideal situation that the community is actually looking for. So let's sort of look into what the first sort of problem is. We're trying to compare over here in black, you see the percentage of women undergrads in computer science. And the second is the Global Gender Gap Index defined by the World Economic Forum based on 4 parameters: global, economical, political, and education, health, economic, and political. So in the US, you see that there's 18% women, and you can see the rank for US over there at 49. We're looking at some more global south, global north countries, and you can see how the percentage is quite low for undergrad, but their ranks are fairly high in the Global Gender Gap Index. Moving on to global south, India at 45% computer science, which is much higher than any of the others, and Qatar at 70%. Their global gender gap index are quite lower. So what is this dilemma where in a context of very high gender inequality as is assumed by the global gender gap index, how is it that women are still able to participate in the computer science workforce? What is it that's coming out of this data? So we look at India and United States specifically, mostly because of the lack of because of the richness of the data that we found for United States. At undergrad, as you can see, almost 3 times enrollment in India at 45%. And as we go ahead, the pipeline sort of continues stronger for India till the time we reach PhDs, where the participation drops, and when we look at tech industry, it's 30%, but that number is not comparable to US, where it's 24%, but it came from the 18% at the start. So as we see, right, it keeps dropping, the number just keeps dropping, and when you look at even advanced careers, which are research careers or academic careers, the number is around 15%. And when you look at our top institutes, such as the IITs or the IIScs, that number is somewhere around 7 to 8%. When we look at HCI, both in industry, academia, the number is somewhere around 30%, whereas in the United States it's at 51%. So what are these different figures, and what's causing these trends is something that motivated this study, and this sort of led us to our research questions. That what are these socio-cultural factors within India that are affecting the participation of this incremental participation in computer science and this decreased participation in HCI in India? And what are these factors that are changing over the life course? Because we are seeing a very clear trend across life stages. So we wanted to understand how these factors are changing across life stages. Diving into some of our methodology, the interviews were conducted across Mumbai, Bangalore, and Ann Arbor. So in Ann Arbor, we conducted it with the Indian diaspora, not with American students. We did N equals to 48, mostly mid to high income communities, and as I said, the aim of this study and sort of the novelty of the study was to cover that entire pipeline from undergrads to PhDs to academic careers to everyone in the pipeline. So that's the novelty of the study. We mostly 1-hour interviews conducted in English by the choice of our participants. We also conducted interviews of course, with junior and senior industry practitioners. Going into the findings, at undergrad and masters, as you'll see on the top, we have a direct comparison going on just to catch your attention. We find that at undergrad level, women face very little STEM anxiety. There's not a fear of being inferior to male colleagues in any way. They report very few instances of gender-based discrimination even at universities, which strengthens their confidence to participate in STEM fields, and specifically computer science in this case. A very interesting bit over here is that there was a very strong parental pressure to actually pursue the field of computer science. And this was mainly because of the job security aspect of it, because computer science is viewed as this economically viable option to pursue. But even more so, we found that it led to the increase in marital prospects of women if they pursued an undergrad degree. A lot of women, as you saw, from 45 to 47% in masters, these factors sort of acted with greater force, where a master's degree in computer science was looked at as a very viable career option, plus looks great on your biodata when you go for your arranged marriages. So this is something that we found. This is the reason parents who have a very strong influence on the academic careers of the children in India, this is the reason we are finding these high numbers in undergrad and masters. We find that even women have these economic aspirations, because of which they're tending to lean towards computer science. Let's hear it from a very senior computer science professor who told us that she was interested very clearly in math early on to do a pure science degree, but her parents gradually forced her into a computer science degree, and she realized that there's a lot of economic benefits to it, and she stuck to it, and she's now doing excellently well in the field. So are some of the factors that affected at undergrad and masters. Let's look at PhD, where the numbers drops drastically. In India, we find that parents, as we said, have a big influence in academic careers. Parents of women are afraid that if they get a PhD, they're going to be very, very overqualified for the arranged marriage market, so to say. And it will be very difficult for women to find suitable grooms. We've cited some related work around the willingness to marry up. And this is the reason a lot of women are actively discouraged from pursuing advanced degrees, and specifically PhDs. Even at universities and in the industry, they face a clear lack of relatable role models. And also, when we talk about participation communities, they don't have enough communities, and when they try to engage with these communities, they face a whole array of sexual advances and marital advances, even in communities such as Stack Overflow or Geeks for Geeks, where they're just going there. So they try to resort to gender-neutral identities. A clear instance that we found over here was that there was just not enough relatability for parents, for women that they could see from this particular domain in computer science, who are doing exceptionally well professionally and personally, and who they can look up to, because they are sort of the influences over here. So let's hear it from a PhD student that who says that if I just do a PhD, I'm just going to be way too overeducated. How will I ever find a groom for myself? And when you're a PhD, you at least expect someone as good as you, and that narrows down your options. So your N sort of reduces. So just to broaden that N, you don't get into a PhD program. Another PhD student told us that when she goes up to look online for computer science leaders and lectures, all she sees is just male professors, and that's sort of not very relatable for her. Moving on to the careers of women in industry and academia. So out of the 30% women that you see in Indian IT, so Indian IT contributes to 10%, almost 10% of our GDP, employing almost 4 million people according to 2016 stats. And out of these 30% women, 80% of them are in entry-level jobs. So with regards to that, we try to understand what were the reasons. So Indian IT in itself has been structured in a way that the place has grown in the suburbs, mainly of these big cities like Bangalore, Noida, and Delhi, etc. And because of which parents have a lot of safety, physical safety concerns. Not just parents, but even their larger families, even when they're married. Because of which their participation sort of decreases when they enter these advanced stages, and hence you see that very high number in the entry-level jobs. When you talk about families, Indian men are notoriously known to avoid domestic work, and the burden of housework falls disproportionately on women. And this is also true for women in the high-income sector, where they are, even if they're not actively pursuing domestic duties, they're supposed to supervise household help, which is relatively cheap in India. So even that onus of supervision falls onto the woman, which sort of decreases their participation in the workforce largely. At workplace, there's still a lot of gender discriminatory practices, such as very poor paternity leave. Women get paid leave almost of 6 months by the mandate of the government, but men can get just 15 days of paternity leave, and that too in government sectors with permissions, etc. So it's a complicated process to get a pat leave. Even at workplace, we see a lot of inflexible workplace practices, such as work from home being viewed as chilling out, even in the liberal companies. So women who have some childcare responsibilities, they don't prefer to work from home because of this. And even within the workplace, we find that women are treated as if they're a part of these informal conversations that happen after the workplace. It could be your cigarette breaks after the workplace, or it could be just guys hanging out at the bar. And women are treated as if they're a part of that informal conversation, which is actually not way too informal. Moving on to just a few stats around average daily household work. So men do an average of 20 minutes, while women do almost 5 hours every day. So you can see why that difference in onus of household work is, as compared to the figures that you see for the United States. As you can hear a senior CS professor talking that, her in-laws live with her, so she has to get up early for chores, and after that she has to go back home early. So with the teaching responsibilities, there's very little time for her to focus on her research. Moving on to specifically the case of HCI, we see that India has close to 25%, whereas US has 51%, and that's mainly because all the factors that work so favorably again for parents forcing them into computer science work against HCI, because of the perception of HCI of being a very artsy field, which hence lacks the prestige of engineering in the eyes of the parents, because of which parents tend to actively deter their daughters from pursuing this field. There's a lot of fieldwork harassment that we saw. There's a lot of gender discriminatory practices at fieldwork, because of which parents are again afraid for physical safety, because specifically ICTD fields require you to do fieldwork in very challenging territories sometimes. Women also report instances such as this, where they face questions like, why are you here in the hotel all by yourself, to men blowing smoke in their faces as a sign of disrespect. An HCI master student reports that her friends would ask us that, hey, you were good at math, why are you actually doing HCI? It's supposed to be an arts field. So these are the factors that work against HCI as a field. Through our discussion, I just want to highlight some of the things. I'm not going to go over the summary again because of the paucity of time. Just doing a quick comparison on India and US, the caveat over here is that there could be some broad brush generalizations. The similarities that we find are that there's some gender discrimination which is very common in the adulthood, while the difference is that in India that you don't face it at the school level, which works for a higher participation. But the degree of discrimination is, of course, in the adulthood. Although the discriminatory events are similar in nature, in India, specifically, women face a very high influence from the parents, which works against them. And there's a very different view of HCI and CS both in the India and the US, but it's much lesser accepted as a profession in India. So, yeah, we're just going to move towards some of the remedies that we've suggested and how we are trying to solve some of these problems. There are these larger societal causes that are, of course, leading on to us, and that's something we don't deny, but there are some gender equity policies that workforce, specifically companies, have a responsibility to play into. That's going to be one solution to the problem. Specifically for HCI research, focus scholarships only for the field, increasing awareness, getting more role models around you for this particular field in India, and not just making these role models visible to the students, which is female researchers here, but also to the parents is equally important. We at Google sort of got inspired from this paper and launched a series of 9 stories of Indian women in STEM, some of the most incredible scientists who are doing some incredible work. And these stories are out there on the web. You can just check them out. You can type in women in STEM Google and you'll get these stories. So yeah, that's all. Thanks a lot to our collaborators and our participants, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have for me. Yeah, Anirudh. Sorry. Yeah, I can. Okay.
So, wonderful presentation. I was curious, what did your cohort, so how did you ensure that your cohort was reasonably representative of HCI, and more particularly, did it include design schools? Did it include, the UI UX professionals? Did it include, and just in the context that there are two sub questions within that. One is the concerns about HCI field being artsy probably work in both genders, and probably it works against men or boys more than it works against girls, in some sense, possibly. So that was a surprising bit of information. Secondly, actually, there is not much pushback against girls going into artsy fields either. I mean, if you go to typical art colleges and design schools in India, there are more girls. I mean, there doesn't seem to be a gender gap there. So bunch of questions in that field.
Sounds good. Okay, so I'll just try to answer the first bit around the methodology. So how we tried to sample our participants was we went to some of these communities, UI UX communities, specifically in Bangalore, and we also had a lot of design students within Google, and we tried to snowball from there. So we just wanted to ensure that the participation of these study participants is across a lot of these from different design schools. So we covered some of the design schools as well as some of the computer science schools that offer a design program. So yeah, we tried to cover that via just our methodology of sampling participants through our contacts and participating in communities that exist within Bangalore. To answer the second bit of your question, that's actually a very true point, right? That how are men then actively encouraged to go into these fields? So we've cited some related work, and this sort of caught our curiosity too. And we found that from some of the related work that whenever there's a new field coming up, the risk-taking capabilities for men inherently, because of the structure of the society in India, is much higher. So whenever a new field pops up, men are much more risk-prone. Like they can take risk towards new fields, whereas women are deterred from taking this risk, and they're hence much more risk-averse. To the third part of your question around it being an artsy field, so it's compounded again with the field work that happens within specifically the field of HCI, and that field work within itself, because of the various factors that we discussed about gender discrimination on field work and just not having a very inclusive place to do these activities, sort of compound against it. And hence, even if it's an artsy field where, as you say, right, that women could be encouraged to go into arts in some of the tier 3, tier 4 cities within India, where they're not actively probably pursued to do this, but yeah, so these factors sort of work against them in that bit.
All right, so I'm out here. All right.
Yeah.
Hey, one thing that struck me about your work was that in some ways it's about social construction of aspiration, and maybe you have more about that, which I didn't catch as much in the talk, and about the construction of the workplace itself and how the workplace is understood, and what makes computing and technology-related work more attractive to other forms of work. And I'm wondering if you, for instance, considered media and how media represents technology-related work. So for example, in Indian films, if you see a woman in an office, traditionally, that means that her father is dead or her husband is alcoholic or something like that. Therefore, she has to go to the workplace, and the workplace is a dangerous place, right? Whereas with computing, increasingly you see women in jobs, and that's safe, and so on and so forth. So what is the construction in the minds of the people, or that whether that came out in your talk or not? I'd like to know a little bit more about that, if possible.
Sounds good, yeah. So that's actually an interesting observation, and yes, so we've tried to draw the social constructs around the workplace when we go deeper into the findings of the IT careers, and we found that IT careers in itself are looked at these safe places where you are sitting in air-conditioned offices, and the luxury of it in itself is viewed very positively by both the women and the parents, with the added prestige of doing a white-collar job and being looked at as someone more powerful in some way. But when you talk about the specific engagement with the media image of women in technology, so we tried to actually engage this, and this was an active conversation that we had, but we tried to draw a rich picture of it in the introduction, but we did not, I think, engage with it as much as in the findings. So I think that's probably something that we could explore in the future. But yes, the active image of women in media vis-a-vis our findings is something that we did not actively engage with now.
Sorry, I have one question.
Sorry, we really don't have time for another question, but I encourage you all to ask questions to the presenters during the coffee break. So let's thank Divi once again. So we're going to have another pre-published paper being presented here. The paper is in the Critical Asian Studies, got published last year. It's entitled Untouchable Cell Phones, Old Caste Exclusions and New Digital Divides in Peri-Urban Bangalore. And presented this paper, we have Aneth Kamath. So, stage is yours.
It's not coming up. Maybe I can quickly put it on the other one. Yeah. कर सकते हैं. Maybe I could. It's not coming. That's the one. First one. The first one. That's the one. Yeah. That's it. This is all my problem. It's entirely my problem. How do I take it? How do you do this? Alright, there we are. And it isn't coming up. Oh, okay. Alright. Okay. All right. Thanks. So, hello everyone. I'm here to present a study, which, yeah. Sure. Hello. Okay. Is this clearer? Okay. Is this clearer? Okay. So this study is a fresh perspective on the complicated link between new technologies and disadvantaged castes, namely Dalits. For those of you who are not familiar with the term, Dalits are formerly untouchable castes situated at the very bottom of the Indian caste system. For centuries have been subjected to severe deprivation, intimidation and violence. And the term Dalit has come to signify the political identity of people who have been called scheduled castes today in the official vocabulary of both the colonial and the post-colonial state. Now, what we do here, just a moment. Yeah, so I asked three questions. the questions that I ask is, what has been the nature of the engagement of Dalit castes with ICTs over 15 years in peri-urban Bangalore city? Secondly, have these technologies bypassed or even been insufficiently harnessed by these historically disadvantaged social groups? And thirdly, have ICTs actually assisted in the reinforcement of this socioeconomic exclusion? Now, the setting of the study is in peri-urban Bangalore city because it is founded on the commonly held vision of the region being a central pivot in India's information economy. And Bangalore city has been pictured by policy and popular perception as a fertile ground for spawning the archetypical information society with all the trappings of a technological culture. Now, as India seeks to upgrade from a developing to a knowledge economy, the government has constantly been framing solutions to address challenges of socioeconomic and environmental well-being, primarily around the deployment of ICTs. And not only in India, but across the developing world, the digital divide is viewed as a conspicuous obstacle to achieving this information society and achieving this knowledge economy. Now, this obstacle is conventionally overcome with digital solutions. And this convenient course of action finds its roots in a combination of an observation that ICTs play an overwhelmingly critical role in all aspects of contemporary economy, and a sort of idealistic assumption that access to ICTs by members of deprived communities will lead them from historical marginalization to seamless and smooth inclusion in the contemporary economic era. But there is also sufficient evidence around us that identity and community are as relevant in virtual worlds as they are in the social world around us. This means that the digital world and ICTs hold different meanings for different social groups who are unevenly empowered. So a social group may attribute a subtle or overt meaning to a mobile phone, for instance, or the usage of a mobile phone, depending on the group's respective socio-hierarchical position and the possibilities of livelihood improvement. So the access to or the usage of any form of technology is invariably embedded in highly context-specific social structures, and these social political variables significantly influence whether or not ICTs such as mobile phones actually deliver these outcomes which they are supposed to. ICTs today, we know through evidence, can demonstrate creative possibilities of actually perpetuating the exclusion of marginalized peoples from livelihood improving opportunities, improved social networks, and social capital. Now, popular and policy notions on development begin with grand fantasies associated with advancing towards an information society or digitally empowered local economy where old sociological variables such as caste are perceived to be aged, deteriorated. They are too impotent to have any place these days. And especially in the popular imagination of Bangalore, caste has been depicted as becoming modernized or democratized or even irrelevant. So this is the kind of vocabulary and this is the kind of perspective that goes around policy and popular discourse around ICTs and development in Bangalore and in India as such. But apart from a small appreciation by, say, the World Bank that maximizing digital dividends requires working with the analog foundations of society, there's been generally a policy myopia of the complicated relationship between technology and society. Now, do you work this? Yeah. In order to answer these three questions, I conducted a study on three cohorts. The first cohort is that of Dalit households in a colony in peri-urban Bangalore. Secondly, Dalit businesses, and third, Dalit activists. Now, the methods that I used, especially for the first cohort, are primarily the oral micro life histories methods. The central methods of documenting life histories of individuals, cultural, sociological, and political engagements with the mobile phones, that was the primary method in the first cohort. The methodology is important because it provides a historical presence to those whose views and values have been disenfranchised. And what I do is not collect entire life histories, but micro life histories of their engagement with mobile phones over the last 15 years. I had open-ended interviews with 13 individuals from Dalit businesses and 11 individuals among Dalit activists. Now, what did I ask people in cohort A? I asked them on what kind of a phone they have, how long have they had this, what is your personal relationship with the phone, what is the role of the mobile phone in your work, do you maintain contact with local Dalit activists, do you use platforms such as WhatsApp for collective mobilization, does it make you feel more liberated, and so on. Now, for the here's what it looks like. In the first cohort, I interviewed 214 individuals. Clearly, there is a strong divide among not only age group but also within men and women, where you can clearly see that the number of the digital divide in the conventional sense between men and women in middle age, that is 25 to 55. Is quite stark in terms of the women. 61 individuals did not own a phone among the women aged 25 to 55. Now, and almost all women aged over 55 did not own one. For many in this cohort, it was the first electronic device they had ever bought in their lives. Somebody like Robin Jeffrey has recorded that in these communities, people buy mobile phones before they buy even a TV sometimes, before they buy a bicycle, before they buy anything. It's the first electronic device that they mostly buy. But at the same time, unfortunately, these phones are only communication devices. They're nothing more than that. They're only to keep contact with the employers. For those in the younger cohort, they were mainly entertainment devices, social media devices for informal conversations, and it was actually a pretty dismal set of findings when I asked them how important is this to you. In fact, only 3 out of the 51 young men that I interviewed had regular employment, so one can only imagine what was going on over there. And people rarely kept in touch with any local civil society or political groups in the region. So that was also dismal. It became only a convenience in this cohort. It was not imagined as a tool that would permit them any sort of access or inclusion in the economic networks of the upper or dominant castes of the region. And when I asked the question about this possibility, many of them just gave me blank stares, and they told me the simple and powerful statement that all this upward mobility is not for us anyway. A serious problem was also the English language, because a lot of job opportunities were put up in English. When I say job opportunities, they need not be white-collar job opportunities. I'm talking even about plumber wanted, electrician wanted, and so on. The worst affected ones are actually the middle-aged, because on the one hand, they have, before the mobile phone era, quote-unquote, came into being, they were highly marginalized because of their caste status. But at the same time, when this came into the picture, they are not only illiterate in using the phone, but again, a sort of double disadvantage comes to them. Now, in cohort B, there was a very sharp contrast, because they said that the phones were a constant companion in their financial and social upward mobility. They allowed, interestingly, because they said, cohort B said that mobile phones allowed them a certain amount of caste anonymity or even liberation. They said, and I quote from my respondents, that I don't know, I can source new vendors from towns just an hour or two away from the phone. I don't know the caste, they don't know mine. All we need is a mutually good price and a quality service. And they even said that people in cohort A are lazy people, and all they should do, obviously, was to migrate to the city and see the immense power of the mobile phone, which they don't realize when they're in their setting. They even said that people in cohort C said that mobile phones have opened up a new virtual space for Dalit activism, where the critical importance of caste actually is slightly eroded, because now you don't have those gatekeepers which you had in conventional journalism and conventional media sources. Now, what's happening here is actually, if you want to interpret the experience of mobile phones and digital communication technologies among these 3 cohorts, and to answer the questions that I had asked in the beginning, I actually see a convergence of 3 things. One is the durability of caste in metropolitan India. Secondly is the social construction of technological usage. And third is the understanding of the digital divide. If you see it over here, you can see that caste still remains a prime source of social and economic capital, despite economic liberalization, because liberalization has strengthened the already capitalized social groups. And a large proportion of emerging businesses in urban India still operate within intra-caste or intra-class insular interactions. So the mobile phone revolution, you can say, has actually to a great extent even bypassed cohort A entirely. Cohort B, on the other hand, caste actually came to some use for them, because they met people who belonged to other subaltern groups within a metropolitan setting, and somehow they claimed that it was a sort of a win-win situation, because people from various subaltern groups had connected together thanks to the mobile phone and then got some sort of solidarity out of that. Now, what we have here is also a sort of limited understanding of the digital divide as a binary have-not dichotomy, and that's certainly not the case, because if you refer the work of Q.I.U., he has clearly talked about a large class of people called the information have-less, and these are a vast group of people, migrant informal workers, precarious vulnerable workers, a huge number of people who constitute the underclass in the city, who may possess the smartphone, who may possess mobile phones, but they lack effective participation in the digital revolution as creators of products, or who are beneficial for informational feedback. In fact, they are simply passive marginalized communities. So there's a huge populist category in the digital divide spectrum that has actually that's actually entirely missing. So what we have to do here is not only acknowledge the durability of caste in metropolitan India, but also expand our understanding of the digital divide as not just have and have not, but a large category of what is called information have less. Here also the third part of the convergence is the social construction of technology usage, where the conventional Scott theory talks more about the social construction of the artifact, but here we also need to acknowledge that the usage of the artifact is also greatly socially constructed, and that you can clearly see in the difference between cohorts A, B and C in the way that they use this device, which was highly sociologically constructed. Even within the domestic space at home, there is a great digital divide. Information have not, have less. Even within households, you can see among men, women, the elderly, and so on. So finally, if I can conclude, I would say that this study goes to show how even the usage of a device, not just the device or the artifact itself, but the usage of a device is actually a socio-material product. And there is nothing very inevitable about the way a technological device operates in a society. There's nothing inevitable about that. The presence of technology and the closing of digital divide are certainly insufficient in the way we have understood it in India. Low-cost technologies need not fight inequality, because they ride on top of that inequality. So to answer my final questions up here, I would say what has been the nature of the engagement with Dalit castes with ICTs over 15 years? It has been mixed depending on what is the category within these Dalit castes and how they socially have constructed the usage of the mobile phone, on how durable caste has been in their particular setting. Have these technologies bypassed or been sufficiently harnessed? In cohort A, definitely. And finally, it's also a yes again. So the liaison between ICTs and disadvantaged castes is actually very, very complicated and not as sleek, neat, or tidy as what popular and policy discourse tries to portray itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Anand.
Fascinating talk. I had a quick question, more an empirical one. Particularly in the category B, and where there's mobility possibilities in category C, or cohort B and cohort C, I was just curious to see whether you actually examined the social network of these usage, and the kind of view that did they surpass, meaning that Dalits kind of talk to non-Dalits, upper caste or different behavior. Did you see evidence of that? Even among the actors, because one would think that it is easy to kind of build cohorts within the solidarity among the Dalit activists, but if they're raising tough issues, are they able to kind of break or hide behind the phone, so to speak, to voice very strong concerns? So I was curious to see whether you examined the social network that the use of phones allowed.
I did examine the social networks, although I have not mapped them and shown them here. I did informally examine the social networks of cohort A and C. In terms of cohort B, it was a little difficult to examine the social networks because I must say that, and in fact, I've written it in the paper also, that there is a big disclaimer. I must say that I'm actually just reproducing what cohort B has said, that they're able to network with people outside of their caste, because when you ask for a good price and when you ask for a good quality service, nobody cares about your caste. They say that. But however, there's a lot of literature, an enormous amount of literature that says that that really doesn't work that way. And I would, in fact, look at my own findings in cohort B with some amount of skepticism. So I must admit that right up front as a response also.
Thank you so much. Let's thank Anat one more time. I know this is a fascinating topic, and I know you all have questions, so I encourage you again, talk to him during the coffee break. I can feel Neha breathing on my neck and making sure that I keep everybody on time here. So our next presentation is going to be on designing for intersections. This was published in the proceedings of the ACM DIS 2018, and we'll have Marisol Wong Velazquez presenting for us. Thank you.
So you're not here? ¿Está bien?
It's stuck there, so you shouldn't be there.
It's,
So we are running late. We have 2 more papers. What we're going to do is not do questions after the next paper. We'll move questions to after the 2 paper presentations that we have. And if you guys need to leave and head over to your open sessions, you can do that then. And then we're going to cut the lunch break short to half an hour. We are postponing the open sessions by, so we'll start the open sessions in about 35 minutes. Okay. It is supposed to be at 12, and it will be, so we'll start open sessions around 12:35, 12:40. I didn't announce a venue change. What venue change?
Then this is even more important. There was an email that came out this morning that the open session titled, "Is This Time Different? The Novelty of ICT and ICTD?" It's been moved to this auditorium, so it's not going to be in the new campus room anymore. And that's happening right after this paper session.
Okay,
yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead. Good morning, almost good afternoon. Good morning, everybody. My name is Marisol Wong Velazquez, and today I'm going to be presenting, as David just said, the paper Designing for Intersections on behalf of our team and of the Georgia Institute of Technology. This paper was originally presented at the 2018 Designing Interactive Systems Conference, and we are very excited to have the opportunity to present it again here today. For we believe that the ideas that we're proposing in this paper are of particular interest to the ICTD community. Sorry. As ICTD researchers, designers, and practitioners, we share the commitment of working with widely different communities across the world towards the achievement of development goals. However, as the United Nations has also said, to reach these goals and ultimately eradicate poverty, we must first successfully confront the challenge of how to build inclusive, culturally diverse societies. Indeed, respecting diversity is integral to development, but finding ways to treat differences within and across communities as assets for development, rather than as deficits that need to be fixed, is quite a difficult task. For us, members of the ICTD community in particular, managing diversity can complicate our ability to translate our users' often conflicting needs, motivations, and behaviors into design decisions. Now, 3 years ago, my lab faced this exact diversity challenge. when we were trying to explore opportunities for ICTs in low-resource learning environments across India. Over a period of 2 years, a group of our researchers collected ethnographic data of children's, teachers, and parents' experiences with technology in West, East, and South India. While the data was very rich, it was also so diverse that analyzing it for imagining design opportunities was overly complicated. There were just too many manifestations of low resource with different problems and different strengths all at the same time. To be able to analyze such complexity and then derive design implications and lessons from it, we resorted to the feminist theory of intersectionality. This theory examines how multiple forms of marginalization related to identities such as age, ability, and language, for example, can limit or create opportunities for individuals and communities. In HCI, researchers have recently begun to explore this theory's potential for topics such as assessing technology's attentiveness to users' diversity, as well as guiding data collection processes that recognize participants' multidimensional identities. In this presentation, I will walk you through how we expanded the application of intersectionality in HCI to the domain of technology design for diverse populations. Specifically, I will show you how we operationalized intersectionality to translate the particularities of diversely marginalized realities into pathways for technology design. The first step that we took to try to engage in this endeavor was to conduct an extensive review of research on intersectionality. The goal that we were pursuing was to try to understand what existing intersectional approaches for data analysis there were, and from there to decide which one could be more effective for informing design. Ever since Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality in 1989 to describe the oppression of African American women, the feminist community has been debating how to use this notion to broaden opportunities for marginalized groups. Now, two possible approaches have emerged from these debates. The first, they call the additive approach, which relies on the idea of identity as being formed by static categories, such as race, religion, gender, and each one is adding on to the other, shaping people's experiences. This approach also views systems of domination as having unilateral power over people. Therefore, people can really not do much to change the reality. HCI has engaged precisely with this approach the most, using it for assessing what aspects of users' identity existing technologies are taken into account or not. This approach, however, leaves very little room for exploring how individuals and communities could use technology to actively resist forms of oppression and change the realities. The constitutive approach, on the other hand, is the one that we find more fitting to our design goals. This approach describes identity construction as a dynamic process based on individuals' unique experiences. For this approach, thus, the relationship between systems of power and individuals is ever-changing. That means that people can actually resist oppression, they can actually have agency and search opportunities for change. So that's the approach that we decided to operationalize. To operationalize it, though, we found inspiration in Rita Damun's work on mainstreaming intersectionality. Hers is the only work that we found, at least, with the potential for supporting a qualitative analysis of individuals and their contexts, including the communities and the institutions that people interact with. Now, drawing on Damun, our intersectional approach to technology design operates under three key concepts that we find important to go over before we can show you how we use them. First, rather than using the traditional notion of intersectionality as static categories of differences that only generate penalties to people, our approach emphasizes intersectionality as a dynamic interaction of systems and processes, such as patriarchy, casteism, ageism, etc., that precisely create those differences. Understanding how these systems and processes interact allows us to uncover the reasons why people accept or resist certain forces of power, thereby illuminating what interventions can be introduced in a certain context and what interventions will not work if we try to introduce them. The other set of concepts is penalties and privilege. By acknowledging the forms of oppression, that these forms of oppression are constantly changing, our approach emphasizes that all individuals experience penalties and they also experience privilege that they can use to resist oppression. Such emphasis on privilege and penalties can allows us to see technology from a holistic perspective. For example, when we see penalties, definitely we see the needs that people have and that we need to fulfill, possibly through technology. We also see the constraints for technology interventions. But when we see the privilege, then we can see resources that we could leverage to conduct sustainable design initiatives. A view of penalties and privilege is definitely useful for envisioning interventions. However, it's still not enough for informing technology design initiatives for diverse realities. For that specific purpose, we use Damun's method of situated comparisons. This method proposes to juxtapose different intersections across different contexts to identify how the experience of one context can highlight possibilities or limitations to change the experience of other contexts. Going back to a research project that I mentioned before, the one with low resource learning environments in India, I will now share with you how we use this intersectional approach that we developed to help us uncover possibilities for technology in such diversity-rich environment. The data we collected in India for this project came from a 2-year multi-sided ethnographic study capturing the realities of 225 teachers, parents, children, and school staff across 7 learning environments from South, East to West India, and including public and NGO-run, rural and urban, and formal, as well as other after-school educational institutions. So it was a lot of data and a lot of different data. To be able to apply an intersectional approach, we went over a two-step process. First, we identify what we already mentioned, penalties and privilege, in the different contexts that we study. To do this, we did a thematic analysis first and then a narrative analysis. The thematic analysis allowed us to recognize common themes across locations, such as gender equity issues and parents' ways to get involved in their children's education. The narrative analysis that we then conducted allowed us to recognize per theme and per study location the different systems and processes interacting in each location, and that gave us an idea of the different forms of penalties and privilege that were available, where people were experiencing in those places. Once we had identified penalties, privilege, and the systems and processes that were producing these penalties and privilege, we moved to the method of situated comparisons that helped us illuminate opportunities for change across the locations we studied. Now, I will share with you how our intersectional approach allowed us to analyze issues of gender at the locations of Kamarhati and Bariupur in suburban and rural West Bengal, respectively. And from that understanding, from that analysis, I will show you how our approach shed light over opportunities for technology in these contexts. The after-school center in Bariupur caters to girls living in villages near Kolkata. In this learning environment, we saw 3 systems and processes interacting education opportunities for girls as vulnerable beings who needed to be protected from sexual attack. The second process we saw was a patriarchal, second system that we saw was a patriarchal system that promotes marriage as the only legitimate future for girls. The interaction between patriarchy and the sexualization of girls results in parents using child marriage as a form of protection for their daughters. In addition, these interacting systems also promote the notion of education being a boy thing only. If sending girls to school is risky due to their sexual vulnerability, and if girls are to be married anyways, and they're incapable of financially supporting their household, then it makes no sense to support girls' education. It's not desirable. It's only desirable to support boys' education. The after-school center mobilizes its privilege to try to give girls opportunities to resist. For example, it harnesses its closeness to the girls' context to try to find convincing ways for motivated parents to keep sending girls to school. Also, it uses its progressive views of the world to offer girls different views, different opportunities to see and shape their aspirations For example, the center offers girls orientations on topics such as child marriage and domestic violence, so that girls can start reconsidering patriarchal practices. It also offers vocational training so that girls can start thinking about different occupational futures. As a result, many girls share with us that they no longer saw marriage as their only option. Others told us that they now wanted to have a career and they were seeking training to achieve that goal. In Kamaharti, we studied a mixed gender after-school center that also faces issues of gender equity, but in this case affecting boys. We saw these issues as the result of three interacting processes. The first and most salient was the industrialization of the area, which created a demand for laborers, and given the traditional gendering of factory work as a male activity, this existing demand was really only for boys and men. The interaction between industrialization, gendering, and the economic needs of low-caste families pushed parents to take their boys out of school and send them off to work instead. While the after-school center is aware of this problem, the forms of resistance it promotes seek to give boys and girls exposure to activities such as cooking and karate that can help children challenge traditional gender roles. The center has not put in place any systematic initiative to address the impact that child labor has on boys' access to education. So when we go ahead and do a situated comparison of these two contexts, we can see how in both cases after-school centers are very powerful supporting structures, but we also can see how understanding how to use these supporting structures for favoring both boys and girls is still a challenge for these centers. In Baripur, for example, the center harnesses its privilege to help girls redefine their occupational aspirations. In Kamarhati, on the other hand, the center focuses on changing boys' perspectives towards girls and women in general. And this indeed favors a more equitable society, but it does little to address the issues that boys face by having to drop out of school due to child labor. A possible point of intervention, thus, is finding a way to assist after-school centers in broadening both boys' and girls' occupational aspirations. From this analysis, our intersectional approach illuminates two possible pathways for technology to help in that need. First, we think that constructionist technologies can foster student self-expression and then allow centers, after-school centers, to further understand the gender-related issues that both boys and girls experience. These technologies can be made available to children through open collocated interaction spaces, such as maker spaces for boys and girls. These can help centers to also reach children who do not attend school regularly. And second, technology could help broaden learners' understanding of occupational options. For example, it can connect students to professionals and other students from remote places who can help boys and girls develop new ideas about the future. In addition to issues of gender, our intersectional approach highlighted other three salient themes, but for a matter of time, we won't go over those, and we invite you to go over the paper where you can find more about our findings. And so I'm going to go quickly through these. To conclude, our work extends conversations in intersectionality in HCI in three ways. First, we demonstrate how looking at dynamic systems and processes rather than static categories of identity can inform technology design. Identifying systems and processes interacting with the user allows us to see the user as an agent capable of mobilizing resources like technology to change their present and their future. Second, we show how identifying penalties and privilege can illuminate limitations and supporting structures for realizing design ideas. And finally, we offer situated comparisons as a method for identifying pathways for technology design across diverse populations. Before I finish, I'd like to make two announcements. After we published this paper, since that moment, we've been making active efforts to explore how to further expand intersectionality in computing. Our lab would like to invite you to read Neha Kumar's and Navina Karusala's paper, upcoming interactions article proposing an intersectional computing, and in particular to join us in an open session on intersectional computing for technology and development on Sunday, where we're going to further discuss implications of intersectionality for ICTD. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Marisol. So we will not have time for questions. So again, I encourage you to talk to Marisol during the break. So we're going to go straight to the next paper, which is entitled Conceptualizing the Link Between Information Systems and Resilience, a Developing Country Field Studies, which was published in the Information Systems Journal, and it's going to be presented by Richard Hicks. So.
So I'm Richard Hicks. I'm Director of the Centre for Development Informatics at the University of Manchester. We've got about 30 researchers researching various aspects of ICT for development. One of those aspects is resilience, and this paper is co-authored by my co-researcher, Angelica Ospina. We start by recognizing that the 21st century is going to see systems experiencing a growing number of external shocks, not just natural disasters, but economic shocks and social shocks as well, plus also longer-term trends such as climate change, and that those can exacerbate existing vulnerabilities, particularly in our interest, the vulnerabilities of low-income communities. What do we need in order to cope with those shocks and to cope with those trends? Well, what we need is resilience, which we define as shown there as the capacity of a system to withstand, recover from, and adapt to short-term shocks and longer-term trends. So our argument here is, in order to preserve the gains that development has already delivered, but also in order to progress further, we need to strengthen the resilience of all kinds of systems. We're particularly thinking of this in terms of more resilient communities, but it can apply this approach, and one can apply this approach to all kinds of systems, down from the micro level of households through communities and organizations and value chains right up to whole nations. As we know, in any development endeavor these days, including the strengthening of resilience, ICTs are going to play a central role. The question is, what role should that be? So that was the core question that our work set out to investigate. We know that ICTs can strengthen resilience. We know that ICTs can undermine resilience. How do we understand that relationship? How do we understand that role? Particularly when you're out in the field, how do we best set priorities for ICTs to be used to strengthen the resilience of communities or organizations or value chains and so forth? That then was our practical challenge in these two settings. We were doing work in an urban district of Costa Rica's capital, San Jose, and also in a coffee farming district in rural Uganda. Both of these were suffering the increasing impacts of climate change. Short-term impacts such as increases in flooding and landslides, and also longer-term problems such as increasing difficulty in accessing water, changes in cropping patterns, changes in cropping locations. So what we wanted to know is, what was the impact that ICTs were already having on resilience in these communities? And from that, how could we prioritize new applications of ICTs that would best strengthen the existing resilience of those two communities? In order to operationalize that, we developed what we call the RABBIT, which is the Resilience Assessment, Benchmarking and Impact Toolkit, which at its heart has a model of resilience that is based on two types of system attribute, or you might call them system sub-property. So there are three foundational attributes that are integral to any conceptualization of a resilient system: robustness, self-organization, and learning, at least some of which are legible on the slide there. And then there's a set of enabling attributes, which are redundancy and rapidity, scale, diversity and flexibility, and also equality. And those facilitate the operation of the other foundational attributes. The definitions are shown there. Of course, there's much more detail in our paper and also in the online materials that we've developed to support Rabbit. Rabbit then develops those attributes into a set of 3 markers for each of the resilience attributes. And these are indicators that one can go into the field and use to measure the strength of resilience of, as in our case, a community. We measure that using a variety of methods. We used a mix of methods in our research in order to properly triangulate our data. So we undertook a survey that asked around about current use of ICTs in relation to those resilience attributes on the previous slide. We conducted a set of semi-structured interviews which asked much more generally about the overall state of resilience within those communities. And then we followed this up with some focus groups which once again narrowed down to ask questions about the role of ICTs, specifically in relation to the resilience attributes. Here's an example of one of a number of visualizations that we produced from that field evidence. What this shows is the extent to which ICTs are being used to strengthen each one of those resilience attributes. In this case, this is for the Ugandan coffee farming communities. This is our wheel of e-resilience being the relationship between ICTs and resilience. So the green sectors are those that are already well served by ICTs in relation to resilience, already having a positive impact. So those are going to be low priorities for future action. So one of the examples there would be the use of ICTs to support social networks was already pretty strong. The yellow segments of the wheel are those in which digital technology is making some contribution to resilience already. So those would be medium priorities for future action. An example would be the use of ICTs to generate additional income. And then finally, the red segments are those where ICTs having very little impact so far on resilience, and so those would be our highest priorities for future action. An example would be better use of ICTs to access resources in an emergency. What we did then is we presented those visualizations and other findings back to the communities via a workshop, and we got that workshop of local community members to then, on the basis of our visualizations and data and presentations and so on, to come up with a set of future action interventions to address the highest priority attributes. I'm just showing a sample here. The 2 top priorities we identified were scale and robustness, and then we broke down the priorities into the individual markers, and we categorized those by the level of involvement. Who would have to be taking action? Would it be the community and or local government and or national level organizations? So examples that the workshops came up with included use of social media to develop multi-level discussion networks around the impact of climate change in the area. This is the example from Uganda, or improving links to FuseNet, which is a food security information system. So having field tested Rabbit, this toolkit, we see it as a practical mechanism for understanding, for operationalizing, for measuring ICT's role vis-a-vis resilience in development projects. What we're now looking to do is to partner with organizations in the field, either to benchmark existing resilience and set priorities for future use of ICTs, or for organizations or projects that want to measure what's the impact of our ICT intervention on a community or a supply chain or an organization. We're particularly interested in doing this in relation to ICTs and the resilience of low-income flood-prone urban communities, if any of you are working on those as an issue. If you'd like to know more about this from an academic perspective, then please refer to the paper as mentioned. It's just been published in the January 2019 issue of Information Systems Journal. If you'd like to know more around practical guidance, then please take a look at our handbook or the case studies which are at the website nict.org/resilience, or you're welcome to chat with me today or to email me later, either if you'd like to discuss collaboration around ICTs and resilience, or if you'd just like more details about Rabbit as a toolkit. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Richard. So, as you know, we're running late for the open sessions. So the plan is to, we went over 20 minutes here, so we'll add that to the open sessions and we'll start 20 minutes later for lunch. So don't starve, and I'll see you around. Thank you.